Hi, and welcome to another Pi Crowdcast. I'm Rick Tarosi. I'm the co-founder and general manager of Pi. Today, we're talking with Kristen Gallagher of Edify. Hello, Kristen.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Rick.
Thanks for coming. It's great to spend time with you. I'm really actually enjoying the green room time because I kind of get to catch up with people I haven't had the chance to chat with, but it's nice to have you on stage as well. Welcome, everyone. I see folks are still rolling in. If it's your first time on Crowdcast, just a few of the features. There's a chat over there where you're welcome to chat with other people in attendance, and I'll keep an eye on that. Hello, Stephen Green. Thanks for coming. And if you have questions, rather than putting them in chat, there's a button down at the bottom of the screen that says ask a question. If you click on that, not only can you submit your questions, but you can see what other people have submitted. And if you agree with the question or want that question answered, then you can upvote it. So then Kristen and I can focus on the topics that are most important to the folks in attendance. As always, this will be recorded and will be live right here at this very same link. And then we'll also publish it to YouTube later. So you can have access to all of this brilliance whenever you like and binge watch it to your delight. So welcome, Kristen. Maybe give us some of your background and tell us about what you're working on.
Yeah, well, first off, if this is what you're binging on a Friday, we might have to talk about your Netflix recommendations. But yeah, let me give some background. So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Edify. Right now, Edify is in a really interesting kind of pivot point. We are becoming a software company. For the last 5.5 years, we've been a learning and development consultancy. We've focused on software engineering onboarding, but now we build software to make that better. So that is a little bit about Edify. And a little bit about me. I have been in Portland for almost 8 years at this point, and really active in the small business and startup community, and was really honored to be part of Pi in this most recent class.
Thank you. What drew you to this work originally? Like, what was the motivating factor there?
Yeah. Well, the Cliff Notes story is I was working a job that I was actually working at a web development company doing business development, so fancy word sales, right? And loved the work. I loved our clients. I loved the technology. Unfortunately, the company itself was very toxic. People were yelling at each other. I mean, like, it was not great. And I kind of basically said, like, I could quit and get a new job. I could be a waitress, or I could start a business. I'm not a good waitress, and I really didn't want to work for anybody else. So I was like, well, I guess that leaves business. So and my actual background is in museum education and nonprofit education program design. And in the corporate world, that's just called learning and development, instructional design. And so I just kind of repackaged that into what Edify started as in 2014. And over time, all of my friends in technology would get these new jobs, and they would kind of tell me, like, this is a great job, but I am having a really hard time understanding what I'm supposed to do or where the documentation is, and it feels like something you could help me with. And so after many coffees with friends, I kind of realized I could actually just fix onboarding for companies. So I just kind of blindly started pitching that to local technology companies, and that kind of grew. And eventually I ended up working with a company called Elemental, and then right after our first contract, AWS purchased the company, and then I came on as a full-time employee and basically hand onboarded almost 100 engineers. And so I decided to specialize in that when I left the company at the end of 2016.
Maybe because it can be kind of buzzwordy, maybe unpack onboarding a little bit for people just to give them some context.
Yeah. So onboarding, as I think about it, is basically what happens between the time you sign your offer letter and probably your first 90 days. Although if you really want to do well with it, you think about your first year. But minimum viable onboarding is 90 days, I would say. And there's multiple types of onboarding. And so I would encourage you to think about a 3-layer cake, a delicious, whatever you want. So for me, there's like carrot cake, red velvet, and then maybe like buttercream, some kind of vanilla cream thing. So the first layer is corporate onboarding, right? So that would be, let's take Elemental for example. Elemental, everybody who joins that company, they would get that corporate onboarding. And then the next layer down is actually departmental. So that is if you're joining the product department or the marketing department or the engineering department. Then the layer underneath that is your team. So you might be on a particular product team or a particular cross-functional team. So all of us that started this company are going to get slices of cake, but it's going to be 2/3 different mostly. Down into different levels of specificity. And the reason that specificity is really important is because we make a lot of assumptions about what people know and the information they're bringing with them into the company. And I guarantee you, an engineer hired at AWS versus an engineer hired at, say, Cloudability or Puppet, they're going to have different sets of information and different ways that they use the same tools, actually. So you have to explain all of that context to them, and that's why your team level onboarding is really important. You got to eat the whole cake.
I love the cake analogy. In your experience, there've got to be some just like common issues that every company you see struggles with. Like, give us some of those kind of common things that are negatively affecting companies that could be easily repaired with an onboarding program.
Yeah. So I think we'll start with kind of that corporate onboarding, and this is just stuff that everybody should have going in. So onboarding in the land of, regular quote unquote work, and then onboarding in a remote experience, which all of us are doing right now, whether we like it or not, we're all hiring remotely. There's some key differences, which I can talk about later, but really common stuff. It sounds kind of sad to say this, but people don't get their laptops. They don't get a desk. They don't get an email telling them what to expect on day one. They don't get key information about who's going to meet them on day one. And, as silly as this sounds, like, remember your first day of like 8th grade or 9th grade, and that you were basically terrified and you didn't really know where you were going to eat lunch. And especially like add insult to injury if you moved somewhere and you don't know anybody. So adults get that feeling too, and pretty much all of us have that on day one of any new job. So all of the work that you do prior to day one, like organizing what should be on their laptop, like what systems do they need access to so that they can actually do their work? Have you actually ordered the laptop, and will it arrive in time? All of those kinds of things, especially that email, giving them context, what to expect on day one. Even in a remote situation, you want to do that too, right? So otherwise, basically what's happening is someone's sitting alone in their closet/office and trying to kind of corral their kids over there or their pet over there. And if they've not been given any kind of instruction about what to do for the first day, they're going to really struggle. And it's going to feel like either they made the wrong choice or you're not interested in them. A corollary in sort of in-person life is when your own manager isn't even there to greet you, or your team doesn't go out to lunch with you. So we have to think about these things in a remote context too, as on day one in the morning, maybe whenever you start, 9 a.m., whatever, your manager checks in with you for 15 minutes. So kind of thinking about both in-person and remote.
Well, and I've been privileged enough to see you work and talk with you about your work a bunch of times. This tends to be a very personal, face-to-face kind of experience for a lot of folks. And maybe talk a little bit about how you are translating with Edify, translating some of that into more of a digital experience for folks.
Yeah. So your onboarding program should never be a sort of way to get away from the personal experience, right? So just because you have a nice checklist or a nice process, just dumping that on your new hire doesn't absolve you from the need to actually be with them, whether that's physically, in an office or at a location or remotely, right? Edify works with a lot of companies that were fully remote prior to COVID. And those people actually talk about how good their onboarding was because they have managers and have team members who have already booked their calendar with several things to do in their first week, and they're kind of checking in video, they're checking in Slack. The thing to really remember about a remote environment is that you have to over communicate even more than you do in an in-person environment, right?
Okay.
So
Yep.
you have to really kind of communicate several times, and also remember that tone does not translate in text, right?
Mm.
So helping somebody understand the sort of culture of the organization, the tone, when you're giving feedback, when you are asking for help, things like that, it's much better done in person. I've also been talking to a lot of smaller local companies that have had, myself included, that are really having a lot of Zoom fatigue or video fatigue.
Yep.
And a lot of us are going back to phone calls, actually. And actually just getting on the phone with somebody, and knowing too that not everybody has the same level of comfort with video. You have to take some time to kind of work out looking at yourself all the time, or putting some window over yourself. Figuring out what your new hires workflow is going to be like is take communication.
Yep. Yeah, I usually just turn my video off and like subject people to whatever avatar I've chosen for that particular Zoom call. But yeah, I think a lot of us are feeling that fatigue, and I can't imagine for somebody coming into a new organization having to deal with that. People have started submitting questions, so let's start jumping into those. The first one is, and very much in line with this topic, onboarding in a remote world. What tactics or processes either one, increase in importance, or two, require significant modification as compared to traditional on-site onboarding? So that kind of along those lines of virtual versus physical kind of thing.
I'm actually going to answer the second part first.
Cool. Yep.
Helpful. So a lot of companies sort of do okay at their corporate onboarding. They have HR kind of handle that. There's usually like a what is this company sort of presentation that HR will do, and that's nice. But what happens when you go into a remote environment is that those slides usually don't translate very well, and any kind of in-person activity is not going to translate very well. So e-learning and digital learning is a whole, industry, it's a whole study and kind of field unto itself. And I would actually encourage people who are kind of transitioning things like HR presentations, even if it's a benefits presentation or culture or product presentation, what do we actually do, or our competitors, actually do just a quick Google search on e-learning principles and start applying that to your actual slide decks. It's very tactical, but start thinking about how you can make things a little bit more engaging. This is actually something that came up in the Pi demo day. The fact that you can't be physically with a person and you're just flashing kind of slides up on the screen means that actually you need quite a bit more content than you think you need. And that's the same with this kind of onboarding experience. So that's kind of item number one. That has to significantly change, right? You can't rely on the same in-person things. However, there's some really awesome tools like Mural and a web whiteboard and a couple of other things that you can use with a little bit of practice. You can use to bring together kind of a more collaborative environment that will model what you would have done in a classroom or in an office. So that's one thing to think about. The other side of that question, what increases in importance? I'm just going to reiterate, hopefully it's not boring, but reiterate your communication, right? It's also traditionally, in public speaking, we tell people who are prepping talks, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? Same is true for new hires, and we needed to do that in real life situations, but it's even more important in a remote situation because you can have just like infinite numbers of screens, of dialog boxes, of notifications, and it's really hard to focus. And especially a new hire who's trying to parse through all this information, they're not really sure how to contextualize or how to prioritize. So you have to do that job for them as a manager and help them understand what their real tasks are and what they should be focusing on.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about, or us a little bit about like documentation, like, and obviously a lot of this stuff tends to be in people's heads, or kind of company mythology kind of stuff. How much should you document? Should you over document? Like what's that content creation look like for somebody?
Yeah, so I think about this on a spectrum, and the spectrum sort of ends are company maturity, actually. So let's imagine that you are a 2 or 3 or 5 person startup, even like sub 20 person, really. You're on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have, enterprise company, right? Company that's 500 to 1,000 plus employees.
Okay.
And then you've got people in the middle of that, right? And the reason that distinction is important is because the level of change that's happening inside of the company is going to be higher on the left side, right? So when you are a startup and things are kind of still in flux and they're not totally baked yet, policies can change, opinions can change. I told my team when I hired all of them, and any time I hire somebody new, I tell them that I will literally change my mind at least 3 or 4 times a day on one thing, and that you just have to get okay with that. But therefore, I'm not going to write down everything, right? I'm going to write things down that have sort of evergreen importance. And on the startup side of the equation, you actually want to err on the side of documenting philosophy, like the way you think about things and the way that people can navigate problems and the way that you want them to navigate problems. You don't necessarily need to document every single policy, every single procedure. It gets a little bit more nuanced when you get into development and technology and engineering. You definitely need READMEs for your software. You need some minimum viable documentation so that you can communicate that amongst your engineers and between your product managers. But if you're coming from a more established company, I would expect that you start to document policies and procedures. We could go on a whole rant about whether or not you use Confluence, or if you used to use Jive or SharePoint or something like that. The way, however you organize things, if it's on Notion, I happen to love Notion, but
I like Notion too.
You really need an information architecture of how you are going to manage this information and then communicate that out to people. Because the biggest problem is that search doesn't work very well, right? And if you are a new hire, just bringing this back to onboarding, if you're a new hire, you actually lack the context to even construct a good search term, right? If you're like, how do I do my job? That's not going to pull anything up in Notion, right? So you have to kind of provide that to them. But just think about where you are in that spectrum and kind of self-regulate, self-manage, given where you are. Because the danger of over-documenting is that you spend too much time doing that when you should have spent it elsewhere, like building a product or marketing or selling.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thank you. Is there a concept like for organizations like startups that are in so much flux on a regular basis? Is there the concept of re-onboarding? Like, do you do something every so often or annually to just make sure everybody's on the same page with the new hires and that kind of thing?
Yeah, for those of us who have watched Mean Girls, do you remember trust me, it's gonna come around. The incident, where I think it was Gretchen that was trying to make it a word, and what the other blonde one was like, no, it's never going to be a word. I feel like no one does re-onboarding. They don't do it for new hires who have been at the company and they're changing teams, and they do it at key inflection points in the company's growth. And I think that they should. And so I'm hoping that it can catch on and then it will be a word. Or be a concept, because it's really critical. What you see over time is that there are sort of like old guard and new guard people. So some inflection points where you would want to do re-onboarding at that kind of corporate level or even at the team level, if your company sold to another company and you are in an M&A situation, right? That's a key touch point. If you are hiring quite a bit, like 20% at any given time, you're growing by 20%. You need to re-onboard people together. So you actually have to knit your team together. So think about how much your company culture changes. Let's say you have 5 people, you add a 6th person. that proportionately has shifted your culture quite substantially, right?
Right.
If you add one person to a 500-person company, the onus is really on the new person to acculturate into that team. When you're a smaller team, you're all kind of feeding off of each other, right? And so there's a lot of value in re-onboarding and in taking the time to talk about, this is our philosophy, this is how we deal with failure, this is how we deal with conflict, this is how we would like to hear from you, so that you can have clarity around those expectations.
So much of your work, I think, really improves and influences employee retention, like makes people feel more included. One of the areas where startups have traditionally suffered and not done a good job is creating inclusive cultures, right? Where even if they're hiring somebody who doesn't look like them or share their experience, they're having a hard time retaining that person because of the culture that's been established. What from an onboarding perspective can be helpful for folks who are trying to build more inclusive organizations?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important concept, and it's true. And I think that, oh gosh, this is a long conversation, actually.
We have time. Good.
Especially companies that have what you might call like an in-house DEI person, program manager. What you see those companies do, if they're really doing their job, they might start including a DEI session during onboarding. I think that is a step in the right direction, but I think you have to be really mindful of how you are presenting that concept and those set of information. You have to think about the fact that you need to protect your existing employees and your new employees coming in, right? And your existing employees are part of an in-group, and your new employees are the out-group, right? And humans are weird. Like, we're not cool, actually. We try to protect our in-group, and that means that we sort of like automatically reject out-group, whether that's because of newness, like they're new, they came in post-acquisition and I don't know, just they're not original to the company, right? Or because of race, or because of gender, orientation, any of these things, right? In-group, out-group, it works the same. This is where bias comes from. It's oftentimes unconscious, but many times conscious. And when you just tell people, this is our DEI policy and this is what we do, that doesn't do anything, right? This is, again, where you come back to learning science. How do people's brains work? So we can't go into depth at it right now, but all of you should look up something called Bloom's taxonomy. And it's basically the most simple model of going from basic understanding of a situation or a fact to higher order thinking about how to process, analyze, evaluate, and actually leverage that new information. And so you have to think about, how am I teaching the people who come into my company to learn about, to respect, and to use the principles that we have for equity and inclusion, right? And people can't do that if there are certain circumstances happening. People can't do that if they feel threatened, or they feel scared, if they feel unsafe. And in a weird way, this actually goes both ways. It's not just for people from a minority group or an out group. It's also the people in the in group. If you have, and I'll just be really blunt here, if you have a group of, let's say, white men and women who have never been challenged on their privilege, their white fragility, then if you bring something up all of a sudden, they probably are going to feel a little threatened. And so you have to kind of think about how do I use these concepts in a neurologically relevant, learning science relevant way. So hopefully that didn't get too theoretical, but a really quick, in fact, the link that you just put in is my favorite resource on Bloom's taxonomy. It also is the first one that will come up in Google. But I've done a lot of really good research on it, so it's good.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was me derailing from everybody else's questions just because you had me intrigued. Next question. One do and one don't for an employee first day. Extra points if you can align it with hiring during the pandemic.
All right. Well, Stephen knows I'm competitive, so I got to get those extra. So I think a do is make sure that you have actually set the context, that they have an agenda and a plan for what their first day is. That's whether or not it is in person or in remote. It is actually more important remote, right? The other thing to do in COVID times is to, or in any kind of crisis time, right? Like imagine that there was an earthquake in your town or your state, and there are still effects of this, right? So it's not just COVID. We need to think about this long term. You need to help set the stage for how things might be changing. So let your new hire know some things are in flux right now. We don't have all of the answers to this, right? And as much as that might seem like it's, it's no news is good news, that's actually not true for new hires, because this is another human thing, right? We create stories in our brain. And if I haven't heard from my manager for a while, or I haven't been invited to any meetings, I'm starting to wonder, like, oh my gosh, like maybe they have to lay me off. Like, what's happening? I don't really know any context about this company. I don't know about sales. I don't know what's really happening here. Most companies are not like radically transparent, like say a Buffer. You don't know, right? And so if we're not communicating how things are shifting and changing and how I should problem solve and parse new information, then I'm going to get confused, or I'm going to get concerned or scared.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. So I think when we talked a little bit about this in the green room, I think there's been a lot of focus on, obviously, the tragic nature of the pandemic and how people have been affected by it. But fact of the matter is, there are some organizations and companies that are actually more relevant or are benefiting from this situation. So what sectors do you see actually hiring during this time? Have you had any experience with folks who are still hiring aggressively?
Yes, yeah, I do see that. Companies that are in DevOps right now, or developer tools, enterprise backend, like a HashiCorp or a GitHub or Circle CI, those companies are still hiring right now. A lot of companies in the DevOps space are hiring. And the reason for that, right, if you think about it, like DevOps tools help other companies run more efficiently. And so actually, as you're seeing the higher level load on products like Zoom or Crowdcast or others, right, that's causing their site reliability engineers to freak out. And so you have this kind of trickle effect where you have engineers at companies right now that are like not sleeping, really. They're working 7 days a week, because the demand from all of us having to be remote is so high that those companies can't even hire fast enough to figure out what they need to do. So they're actually trying to purchase new software that can help them kind of manage that, right? So you're seeing DevOps hire. I'm also seeing still like not like increased hiring, but steady hiring in like telecom and other assorted kind of communications technology companies. Right now, you're definitely not seeing like consumer hiring, although spending is not. I mean, if you look at the, say, earnings calls from Starbucks and Amazon, obviously we are all spending money still. To some extent, my house looks out into a cul-de-sac, and there's an Amazon truck that comes by at least twice a day to at least 3 of these houses, right? So like, it didn't happen before. So people are actually buying more from Amazon and other assorted places right now. There is still a lot of hiring going on in blue collar land, right? Where like factories, shipping, things like that. And there are a lot of efforts right now to build out systems and practices where it's safe for that kind of hiring to continue to happen, and for people to be physically present with each other.
Cool. Thank you. That sparked another question for me. So often, you hear companies saying, well, you can't work remotely, you need to be in the office. Do you see this situation changing that dynamic, or do you see us kind of returning back to the previous model once the danger is past?
Yeah, the short answer is I don't see us returning to the status quo.
Okay.
I have an old client that already hired us to do another onboarding project. And last week they came back and said we need to double that project because we're not going back. We're going to do work from home. We are canceling our lease. We're not having offices anymore. And that's my only client that has said that. But I think it's an interesting indicator, and they are also a client that's still hiring. Frankly, it's like, how are you going to pull a bunch of people back from their homes, right? To be honest, I think that when the school systems start to reintegrate kids into in-person classrooms, I think people are going to actually realize that the commute that they don't have anymore is awesome for them, that they're probably sleeping better, they're probably taking better care of themselves. I definitely don't want to minimize the fact that having kids at home is really challenging for working parents. And I think in March and April, we saw people actually have this huge dip in productivity because they just didn't know how to work and how to manage that remote environment. I think when that starts to go back to normal, companies are going to realize that they didn't burn down, things didn't close, sales still happened, it all worked out just fine. And I think you'll actually see that productivity go up. So I don't think we're going to go back to normal. I think there are going to be companies that have to rewrite their policies and basically say work from home is very optional. And, I don't think you're going to see a lot of people coming back to offices. I would like to see HR teams figure out a way to require people to come back. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good insight. Yeah, I personally, from a Pi perspective, we've kind of been struggling with that, right? Because so much of, and you've had this experience, so much of the magic of Pi is just the serendipity of sitting in an office with a bunch of other people, and it's really hard to recreate that artificially. So
I think that what we will see, and what I'm actually very hopeful for, is a better use of that time, right? The times when we are physically together, when we do need to collaborate, that we're actually really doing a good job using that time and we're facilitating that time better. I think, not to be flippant, but I think if anything, COVID has taught the sort of future of work and work from home land that we all took a lot of things about work for granted. The way that you communicate, the fact that you didn't have to really have an onboarding program because a new hire could swap around and ask people and go to random desks. That just can't happen anymore, right? And so what COVID is doing, I think, is showing us the vulnerabilities of our businesses. It's certainly showing us the vulnerabilities on our revenue side and from a venture capital side. But it's also showing us how we were not necessarily using our time well, right? So I think as we've seen, Zoom is obviously shooting way up, and we're going to see it go down again, I think Zoom should not get so comfortable with its stock price right now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This is a question from Kate Ertman. Hey, Kate, who we had on yesterday. Was that just yesterday? Do you have a suggested amount of time that the employer should wait before having the new hire actively jumping right into work? How long should a new hire just absorb the environment?
I think it's a really good question. And I think about it in two ways. One is in acculturation, and the other is in self-actualization. So people get hired to do a job. They went through probably a rigorous interview process, and they have a set of skills that they are ready to apply. The longer you keep them away from actually applying that, the less they will be able to self-actualize into that job, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You want to be applying your brain to something useful, right? If you have somebody who doesn't want to do that, you probably went wrong in your interview process somewhere, and we can talk more about that later. So you want to balance how much time you spend having them read stuff, watch stuff, observe, and then actually doing something. So most of the onboarding that we do is for software engineers. And a lot of our companies have a goal of actually getting your first commit done in the first 2 or 3 days, if not by the end of the first week. And
Wow.
then for that, it does sound really fast. I'm not so much of a first day fan. I'm more of like first 3 days kind of fan. But the reason that it is done that way is so that you can actually get in and learn by doing, right? That brings up another kind of component of this is try to start getting to know your new hire personally and understanding how they like to learn, right? Are they somebody who learns by doing? Are they somebody who learns better by listening? Are they somebody who learns better by actually just reading through, and once they're all done, then they try it? Are they a pair programmer? Things like that. So you can, as a manager, ask a few questions even beforehand, before they show up on day one, and start articulating some activities and some ways of doing that. But I think a good rule of thumb is have them work on a real project before the end of their first week. You know, give them something real and true, even if it is a bug that is not going to actually affect anything, or they're not shipping anything that actually moves the product forward. Give them something real to do.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that reminds me of when we did our work from home panel. Cami was talking about the automatic hiring process, where they actually, once you've made it through a certain phase, they bring you on as a contractor to work paid for a couple weeks to figure out if the business is right and if it's a good fit. So I've always found that interesting. This is a really good one. You all have good questions. I just really like this one. What suggestions do you have for a non-technical co-founder to connect with and show respect for the company's new engineers? So if you don't speak the speak, how do you embrace the engineers?
Yeah. Okay. I have some opinionated opinions on this. Technically, I am a non-technical co-founder. It's I'm in kind of an awkward situation because I've had to learn tech speak to actually do my job over the last 5 years. So I
seem to remember you spending like 4 weeks mucking around with a website framework at some point.
Yeah, I learned Django, and like I know HTML and CSS. And part of that, that was in Oregon Story, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
How time flies. We just retired that website too. So gosh, as a non-technical co-founder, I think that you owe it to your engineering team, and you owe it to the success of your company to understand the language, right? For better or for worse, and this is my opinion, it's not fact, as there's pretty much no fact in startup land. All opinions about everything. I think that as a founder, you need to understand all parts of the business. You can't just like pass away your finances to your bookkeeper and just ask them to show you cash flow projections. You can't just hire a salesperson and expect that suddenly sales will start happening. You can't just sort of not understand marketing funnels and process. And the same is true with your technology. Now, I'm not asking you to understand everything, but there are some key things to understand. So, for example, go and learn what we mean when we say software architecture. What does it mean to talk about the architecture? What does it mean to talk about an API making calls or making calls to an API, right? Based on how your product is built right now, literally do a Google search, right? If your product, for example, my product is a chatbot, right? So I've done a ton of reading and watching and learning about just how chatbots are built. Now, I'm not the one who builds it, right? I'm not the one who understands the framework. I'm not the one who can read the language, right? But just trying to get my head around it. And I give myself about 2 hours a week to just like pay attention to what's happening in my engineering Slack channel. I talk to my product manager. I feel very lucky to have a product manager who can translate my customer vision and what we are hearing from customers into engineering product requirements that they can actually code on. But I have a couple of book recommendations. I think This one is more about DevOps, but I think it is helpful anyway. You should definitely take a look at Accelerate, which has a couple of authors, but Nicole Forsgren is one of them, and Jean Kim, I think, is the other author.
Okay.
And looking at my other, the other one you should read is Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry. That's more about product management. My bookshelf is over there. That's what I was looking. Yeah, I just really think that it is part of your job to understand it. It doesn't mean that you need to get into the code.
Well, and I think just to add on there, it's no different than any other community or culture you don't feel part of. Sometimes a good way is just taking the opportunity to be present and, within the community. So if you're working in a certain tech stack, go to a couple meetups or user groups about that tech stack and just get a feel for that community and the language that they use.
2 other suggestions, and I also want to say, Eric, I really appreciate the suggestion you talked about, that may I suggest that you sit down and ask your engineers to explain what they think is cool or beautiful about their work. That is very similar to an interview question that I have. And it's more about, why are you here? What about this particular product technically is interesting to you, and how can you relay that interest to me, right? And so that helps to bridge a gap a little bit. And I think there are lots of stereotypes out there about engineers or marketing and creative people, and so the less we lean into those stereotypes, I think the more we will be able to bridge some communication gaps. And just asking, like, hey, are you somebody that likes to receive praise in public, or are you somebody that would rather give you feedback in private, right?
Right.
There are things that you can kind of learn about your personalities on the team to help bridge that gap too.
Cool. Thank you. For context on this next one that folks might need, there's been a project at kind of the city level within the Portland startup community called the Tech Pledge, which we've already kind of touched on diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So this was what that program was designed to do. The question is, from your perspective, why isn't the Tech Pledge working, or why isn't it moving the needle as it was expected to do?
Yeah. Gosh, this is a good question. So I have a long-term experience with the Tech Pledge in that I knew PDC was working on this before it was PDC,
right?
Or before it was Prosper. And I also, when I worked at Elemental, Sam Blackman, who was Elemental's founder, was a key person in creating the Tech Pledge. And before Elemental hired AWS, Nancy Garcia, who at the time was the DEI program manager, it was my job to figure out what we were going to do with diversity. And we can talk about what we actually did and what worked and what didn't work another day. But from a programmatic sense, my feeling about the Tech Pledge was that it lived too much in theory and not enough in practice, and there's accountability. And unfortunately, I think we haven't. I think there's this academic argument for diversity that says that having a diverse board, having a diverse executive team, a diverse team will make your product better. It will make your company more profitable. We can see that, right? We already have the data about that. What is wrong with that is that people are not rational. People can look at data all day long, and it doesn't actually matter, right? Like, you can look at COVID stats all the time, and it doesn't change the fact that you probably didn't want to wear a mask at the grocery store at the beginning. And what changed you wearing a mask, I'm just going to venture out here, is that everybody else started wearing masks. So social pressure is actually what the real lever is. Data is not the real lever. So I think that Prosper had a really good intent in trying to get local companies together. But the reality behind kind of a social maneuver like a pledge, where you sign onto something but you don't really know what you are signing onto, because at the time there wasn't like a curriculum, there wasn't a program design, there wasn't a solid set of evaluations, and there was no real accountability. Like, what does it mean if you don't hit a goalpost? Do you get kicked out of the pledge? Is it public? Right? That's not what it said, right? It's definitely, I think it was well intended, I want to say, too. And also what it did is it kind of continued to bring the same people together over and over again, people who already believe in quote unquote this stuff, right? People who already wanted this change in their companies, and it kind of fizzled out at an executive level and fizzled out at a sort of accountability level. And I also want to be, I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm not a DEI professional, and this is not my career, but it's an observation. And a lot of the time, I get into positions where I've built trust with an executive, and they don't feel threatened anymore, and we can talk about things like this. And I think there's some leeway that I have as a sort of a white female professional that a lot of people don't have, who are not those things. And so I think what I've seen I've worked with a lot of the Tech Pledge signer companies, and I've seen a lot of good intent. But at the end of the day, I think you have levers that are not allowing it to happen. One is a focus on data. Two is that the Tech Pledge didn't really take into account that a lot of these companies are venture funded, and therefore the pressures that come down from the board of that company mean that the company has to make trade-offs in how they invest money, how they invest time. And a lot of the time, those trade-offs don't feel so humane. They don't feel equitable. They don't feel humane. They're not equitable sometimes. They're not humane. And so I think it's a really complicated, thorny issue. There's so much talk in the chat that it makes me wonder if we should have a different conversation and bring a few more perspectives in.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We'll work to get something like that on the schedule, because it is a topic. It's come up time and time again in some of our conversations, and I think the theme that seems to be reiterated from folks is a definite concern that this kind of work was a nice to have and not an imperative, and that in times when the economy is doing well, people focus time and energy on that, but when we're in times like these, that may be something that they don't focus on as much, and what we don't want to see is avoidance or backsliding or any of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll definitely work on getting some folks together. Would you like to be part of that one? Not to put you on the spot, but okay. Thank you.
I definitely don't want to take space if there are other folks who could be better, but yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So we made it through all the audience questions, which makes it, and we're getting close to the top of the hour, so it makes it the perfect time for us to kind of turn the tables and ask you, what can we as a community be doing to help you, help Edify? How can we be most helpful right now?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Edify is currently pre-launch. We will be launching our software publicly in July. Okay. And so any kind of like sharing, we put out a lot of videos on LinkedIn. We try to be active on Twitter. Push our beta sign up to folks. If you know, our product is specifically for software engineering teams. So if you know a manager who wants to do a better job with their onboarding, I would love to either talk to them or for you to share our beta sign up with them. And if you know somebody who is really, really passionate about onboarding in the software engineering space, I would love to interview them. So that's my ask.
Awesome. Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's always a pleasure to get the chance to hang out with you. And I always learn something in talking to you. So again, greatly appreciated. Thanks to everyone who showed up. And this was a great, I think I'm going to export this chat session because there was a lot of great chatter going on there as well. So thank you for doing that. We're working on scheduling more of these for next week. So if you want to show up, I think the only one on the schedule now is me. I'll be doing an open Q&A. Ask me anything. If you have questions about Portland or Pi or the startup community, please join us. And then just follow Pi on Crowdcast, and you'll get alerts when we schedule new things, including this new panel that Kristen just assigned me. So I'll get that figured out.
Awesome. Wrestling out work for people. So
thank you so much for your time. We'll see you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.